Here's the thing, though. I spent the next 6 months here in Massachusetts designing the computer lab, raising money for the computer lab, recruiting volunteers to come with me to Tanzania. I spent 0 time in Tanzania, right? So I showed up, flew into Dar es Salaam, drove like 4 hours west to this tiny town called Kuala with a fully baked and what I thought finished design for a computer lab. We built the thing, looked great, it was going awesome when we left 3 weeks later. I returned to the town 6 months after that. 6 of the computers had been eaten by ants. 3 of them had stolen or just disappeared, no one knew where they were. The 10th and final computer, it was very safe. It was also locked in the headmaster's office where no one could use it. The point being is the reason that my first attempt at building a computer lab with my nonprofit was such a failure was because I didn't get out there, right? I did not go out into the community and talk to them and figure out, hey, do you guys want a computer lab? Like, would it be helpful? If you did, what would it look like? Let's think about designing this thing together. And hey, like, let's build a simple prototype that might help us understand what would work and what wouldn't work early in the process. So again, that story to me just says, hey, look, it's a simple thing. Like, of course you would go out into the community that you're trying to help and talk to them early in the process. Yeah, like, I did exactly the opposite. So the first sort of tenet of human-centered design, as I see it, is get out there into the community and talk to people. I think second is to think about, talk to extreme users and analogous users. So it's one thing to sort of get out into the community and let's say, I was designing a new computer lab for middle school students in Tanzania, and the only people then that I talked to were the middle school students at the potential school. That's a great start, but you also want to think about who are the super extreme users that you can learn a bit more from. Even if they're not your target audience, you can also often learn a lot more by talking to people at the extremes. So an example might be, I would talk to sort of that super nerdy kid that I found in like Dar es Salaam or something who spent like 23 hours a day like playing games in the local computer kiosk or internet cafe. And then maybe I talked to like, I don't know, a 60-year-old grandmother in a rural village who'd never once sat in front of a computer. And I'd get sort of their perspectives on sort of what they thought the computer lab would mean to them and sort of what needs they might want to get out of a computer lab. So again, it's just when you get out into the community, don't just talk to your target user, try to go very broad in who you're talking to. And then secondarily is try to get some analogous inspiration. So once again, if I'm designing a computer lab in Tanzania, what are some other sort of places where people go where I could sort of learn from what their experiences were like? Maybe I could visit the public library here, in Boston and understand, hey, like, what's working? This is a place where people come together and congregate and talk to people. Maybe I could go to a coffee shop. And so again, it's this idea of sort of getting inspiration from places that aren't just the exact thing that you're trying to do, but it's also trying to push the creative part of you to get inspiration in other places or locations. Third is work with other disciplines. So the thing with sort of a traditional design studio is it would be a lot of designers that went to very traditional places like MassArt or RISD, who all had sort of, in a lot of ways, sort of similar ways of thinking. One of the things that IDEO has done pretty successfully is they've sort of brought in a bunch of folks who don't necessarily have traditional design backgrounds into the creative process, right? So I originally trained as a lawyer. I worked with a lot of folks who have MBAs or went to architecture school, trained as anthropologists, trained as sociologists, right? It's this idea of working with people who don't view the world the same way that you do and don't have the same approach to problem solving. Human-centered design is sort of a deeply sort of collaborative and sort of group-based approach, and it really works best if within that group you have people from diverse backgrounds and with diverse problem-solving approaches. Fourth is just to sort of consider the system in which you're working, right? And so to the extent that human-centered design is deeply qualitative and starts with people and asking them about their needs and their desires, that's the first step. right? And you're really going to understand sort of what's desirable and what do people want. But the thing is people live in a very complex system, right? And Rebecca was alluding to that a little bit. And so you need to also consider this idea of what's business viable, right? What a project we did involving designing clean water drinking kiosks in Kenya. We spent a lot of time talking to people and doing early prototyping. And then we had a business designer on our team, right? Someone with an MBA who knew how to use fancy Excel spreadsheets that I don't. And Emily was able to sort of look at these two prototypes that were sort of equally as popular with the folks that we spoke to. And she was able to tell us that prototype 1 was going to cost X, and prototype 2 was going to cost 10X, right? And so at that point, we understood that from a business viability perspective, if our clean water kiosk was ever going to improve lives in Kenya, we needed to go with prototype 1, which made a lot more business sense, right? And so that idea of business or viability, you have to understand sort of where human needs and desires live in relation to business viability. And then third is just technical feasibility, is to really understand sort of where's the technology heading? Is there new technology out there that you could potentially use? But vice versa, what are the realities of the technology that people are actually using, right? We did a challenge with my Amplify program looking at safety for women living in urban slums. There was so much enthusiasm around smartphone apps, right? The point being is that smartphone apps don't help the vast majority of low-income women living in developing world cities, right? So it could be the best idea, people want it. It could be business viable, apps are cheap. But the point is if the technology isn't there, if people don't have smartphones, they don't have access to fast internet, an app doesn't do them any good, right? So a good human-centered designer is sort of living at the center of that Venn diagram there, of those three approaches, or those three mindsets. Fifth, this one's pretty obvious, but it's also sometimes harder than you think, is to get visual, right? The whole point is like we have two sides of our brain. One's really analytical, and the other is very creative. And the point is by forcing yourself to get visual, particularly if you sort of know about yourself that you tend to be a little bit more sort of logical and using words and all this other stuff, the act of getting visual just pushes your brain in new directions and it gets you out of your comfort zone. Sort of the stereotype is very true of the IDEO design spaces with sort of post-it notes and the really, really important role that they play in our creative process. And then finally, I've said this a couple times before, but I want to repeat it because it's so important, is the role of prototyping early and often in your creative process. I'll just give you a couple examples from a project that we did in Ghana, in Kumasi, Ghana, a couple years ago, involving designing a new type of toilet social enterprise or toilet system in Kumasi. Our sort of design challenge was, how could we replicate something close to in-home sanitation, but in a city where there was no underground sewer system? So get toilets into people's homes, but without the ability to actually flush them and have it go into a sewer or a latrine. So we talked to a lot of people early in the process, right, because that's how we start. We also heard from a lot of the experts that we talked to sort of the importance of, hey, look, like, if you're going to put a toilet into people's homes, it should replicate sort of a Western flush toilet, right? And we talked to people about that too, and it was very aspirational. A lot of folks we heard, particularly in sort of middle class, rising middle class homes, absolutely, right? They wanted a flush toilet. So very early in the process, we went and we figured out where could we find some flush toilets that would roughly replicate that. And we found a bunch of boating toilets. They were designed for like putting on your boat. And they actually had water and they had a flush system. And so we put them into people's homes for 2 weeks, very early in the process. And then we came back at the end of it. And we said, so, how did that go? Well, it turns out that in your average household in Kumasi, something like 20 to 30 people were sort of living around a shared common space and all sharing one toilet. So 20 to 30 people using one flush toilet created a gigantic mess. Secondarily, and this is the sort of, second humorous reason, tons of little kids running around, right? Little kids were fascinated by what happened when they flushed the toilet and the water came out of it, right? So you had a combination of too many people using it and lots of kids just playing with it as sort of the new fun thing to play with. The combination was that as much as flush toilets originally made sense from both the people we talked to and the experts we talked to, in reality, when we prototyped it, it just wasn't the right solution for this community in Kumasi. A sort of corollary of that was we asked a lot of people, okay, look, like, if it's not going to be connected to the underground sewer system, someone's going to need to come in and change the waste out, right? And we asked a lot of people, we said, okay, look, like, would you like to empty your own waste and pay $5 a month for this service? Or would you like to have someone come and do it for $10 a month? Originally, we heard from lots and lots of people who were cost conscious and smart about their budgets. They said, look, yeah, $5, I'll save the money. Someone in my family will empty our own waste once a week, totally, no problem. Again, we sort of left them with a toilet. We left them with a system and a place to go for emptying their own waste. Turns out, actually no, I'll pay someone else to empty my toilet, right? Very quickly, when people actually saw that, like, what it would entail to sort of carry the waste sort of past their neighbors, go to the place to empty it out, they realized that in reality this wasn't something they wanted to do, right? But once again, because we prototyped very early in the process, we were able to sort of figure out that we went wrong there with our assumptions, and we were able to pivot, and then we created a sort of service-based system and did a bunch of training and set up an infrastructure for having delivery men sort of come by the house each evening to pick up and swap out the waste. So again, just sort of two simple examples of how, because we were able to prototype really early and quickly, we were able to sort of avoid wrong turns that we might have made in the creative process.